Come sit with me a while. I've got a story about a dry well, a hat with a hole in it, and a man who said more with a hammer than most people say in a lifetime. The drought had lasted 93 days when Cora Hale's well started lying to her. It had been giving less each week, half buckets where full ones used to rise, brown water where clear once ran. But on this morning the rope came up lighter than air, the bucket swinging with nothing but a cup of mud at the bottom and a smell like iron and surrender. She stood over the stone mouth of the well and did the arithmetic she'd been putting off since June. 7 rooms in the house, 400 acres of grass turned the color of old newsprint. 2 boys who hadn't spoken to a man since their father's funeral 8 months ago. And now the water was deciding to leave too. Now, you have to understand something about a widow's arithmetic out here in Wyoming. It ain't like a shopkeeper's ledger, it's subtraction every single day. Subtract the husband, subtract the rain, subtract the hours you used to share across a kitchen table. What's left is what you carry alone. And you carry it until your knuckles split, or your back gives, or your well goes dry, whichever comes first. Cora strained the mud through cheesecloth into a pitcher. Enough for coffee, a little for the boys. Not enough for the cattle, and not enough for the garden, and not enough for anything that might keep 400 acres from turning to dust under her feet. Josiah sat at the kitchen table without looking up. 11 years old, jaw set even while he chewed, holding himself the way a man holds himself at a meeting he didn't call and doesn't want to attend. Samuel 5, thumb perpetually hovering near his mouth, watched the chair pushed against the far wall. The 4th chair. Nobody sat in it. Nobody moved it. It held its position like a grave marker with legs, and the whole family walked around it the way you walk around a hole in the floor you've decided not to fix. She set 2 cups of strained water on the table. On the kitchen wall beside the stove, a list hung from a bent nail, her husband's handwriting, broad and impatient, 31 repairs he'd meant to get to. Porch step, fence line north, barn stall hinge, window box Samuel asked for, shelf in the bedroom for her books. She'd crossed off 4 in 8 months. The pencil dangled beside the list on a piece of string. The ink was starting to fade in the heat, as though even his words were leaving. By the back door, a pair of work gloves hung on a nail, calfskin, darkened with dried sweat, shaped to fingers that would never fill them again. She passed them 17 times a day, never touched them. Josiah checked them every night before bed, pressed his hand flat against the leather and held it there. Some ritual she'd never asked about and he'd never explained. Down the hall, past the boys' room, past hers. A door stayed shut, her husband's study, locked. Josiah tested the handle each evening, confirming it held. Whatever lived behind that door, they'd agreed without speaking to keep it sealed. She looked out the window. 400 acres of nothing, waiting to be watered by a sky that had forgotten how. He came up the road around mid-morning, and the first thing Cora noticed was the horse. The mare favored her left foreleg so badly that each step looked like a small apology delivered to the ground. The man riding her wasn't much better, lean past the point of economy, sunburned raw across the nose and forearms, wearing a hat with a hole punched clean through the crown where the brim met the dome. She could inventory his possessions in one breath: bedroll thinner than a hymnal, canteen dented on both sides, $3 visible in his shirt pocket because the pocket had lost its button somewhere between wherever he'd been and here. He stopped at the fence line and didn't dismount until she came to the porch. "Ma'am?" He touched the brim of the ruined hat. A habit. Like tipping something that used to be worth tipping. "I'm looking for 2 weeks' work, not charity. Work." His voice was dry and level, like a man placing an order at a feed store. No performance in it, no plea. Just the transaction. Cora studied him the way you'd appraise a plow at auction. Was there any use left in it? His hands were rough and his back was straight. Whatever had brought him to a widow's fence in the dead of a drought, pride hadn't left him yet, or maybe pride was all he had left, and that was why he was holding it so carefully. "I can pay $1.10 a week," she said. She knew it was an insult dressed as wages. She said it anyway because the well was dying and she needed hands and couldn't afford good ones. "Suits me fine." He didn't flinch, didn't negotiate, didn't ask about meals or the barn or why a woman sitting on 400 acres could barely scrape together hired man money. From the upstairs window, Josiah watched without moving. His reflection in the glass was perfectly still, a boy practicing being stone. Samuel stood behind the screen door with his thumb near his mouth, studying the stranger with the open, animal patience of a child who hadn't learned yet that not all men who show up are worth watching. "Barn's that way," Cora said. The man he'd said his name was Eli Corwin, though she'd barely registered it, nodded once and led the limping mare toward it. That night she lay in bed and heard hammering from the barn. Steady, unhurried. He was fixing the stall door. She hadn't asked him to start until morning. She hadn't asked him to start with that. She lay in the dark listening to a stranger repair something in her barn, and a feeling rose in her chest that she couldn't name something caught between relief and alarm, like hearing footsteps in an empty house and not knowing whether to call out or hide. Eli found the list on the second morning. He'd come into the kitchen before dawn, moving the way a man moves who has spent years learning not to take up space. The house was still, Cora and the boys asleep. The list hung on the wall in handwriting that wasn't hers, broader strokes. A man's impatient lettering, the kind that presses hard enough to dent the paper. 31 items, the pencil dangled beside it on a string. He read each line slowly. Some were practical porch step, fence line north, barn hinge. Some were the kind of thing a husband writes down because his wife asked once and he wanted her to know he'd heard. Window box Samuel asked for. Shelf in bedroom for her books. The intimate ones were harder to read than the broken hinges. They were promises wearing work clothes. He took the pencil and drew a thin line through barn stall door, then went outside and started on item 2. He didn't ask permission, didn't mention it to anyone. But by picking up a dead man's pencil and starting his unfinished list, Eli had stepped across a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He was either filling a shape left behind or breaking one open. He didn't know which yet. Neither did she. Josiah came downstairs around 7, saw the fresh pencil mark a stranger's handwriting crossing through his father's words. The boy's face closed like a fist. He stood there for 3 full seconds, then turned and walked upstairs without a sound. That afternoon, Samuel found Eli at the north fence line. The boy didn't speak, just planted himself 6 feet away, thumb near his mouth, watching with the grave attention of a surgeon observing technique. After a while, he set a biscuit on the fence post, walked back to the house without looking over his shoulder. Eli waited until the boy was out of sight, ate it in 2 bites, kept working. That evening, Cora came downstairs and stopped at the wall, one new line drawn through her husband's words. She touched the pencil mark, different pressure, different slant, same wall, same nail, same list. Her fingers stayed on that thin, foreign line longer than they should have. Days 3 through 6 moved the way heat moves, slow, accumulating, invisible, until you realize everything around you has changed. Now, there's something you ought to know about watching a stranger finish what your husband started. It don't feel like help. It feels like haunting. Every nail he drives is a nail your husband didn't get to. Every board he sets straight is a crooked thing left behind by a man who ran out of time. And the widow standing at the window can't decide whether to be grateful or furious. So she's both, every hour, and shows neither. Eli worked through the list the way a man works through a debt steady, unhurried, precise, fence posts, the porch step that groaned like a sick animal, the hinge that shrieked every time the barn door swung. He didn't rush, didn't cut corners. Every repair was a small, wordless conversation with a ghost he'd never met. He noticed things he didn't mention. Cora's hands cracked at the knuckles, raw between the fingers. The hands of a woman doing work meant for 2 people with the body of one. He started finishing the heaviest tasks before dawn, so she'd come outside and find them done without being told. The water trough cleaned, the feed bin restocked, the axe sharpened and set back on its hook, blade oiled. On day 4, Samuel left a feather on Eli's saddle. Day 5, a smooth river stone. Day 6, a piece of string tied in a knot so careful it must have taken 20 minutes. Eli collected each one without acknowledgement and kept them in his shirt pocket, the one with no button. Where the $3 used to live, Cora brought him water at midday. He took the glass. Their fingers didn't touch. The glass was warm from her palm. He drank from the same side she'd held. The window box went up on day 6 pine, built from scrap lumber, sanded until the grain showed through. Eli set it on the porch rail and left it empty. That evening, Samuel stuffed a fistful of dried weeds into it. They were brown and brittle and dead. They looked like flowers anyway. Josiah still carried water with the shoulder yoke built for his father. It bit into his collarbone and left red welts the shape of parentheses on his skin. Next morning, the yoke had been shortened 2 notches recut. Red rilled, lowered 3 inches. Josiah used it. Didn't say thank you. Didn't throw it away either. He used it, and that was its own language. Eli counted the list that night. 14 items crossed off, 8 days left. He was going faster than he should have. He didn't let himself look at why. Cora heard him talking on the 7th night. She'd come downstairs for water, the rationed kind, measured in cups now, portioned like medicine, and heard his voice carrying from the barn. Not the clipped, minimal syllables he spent on humans. Full sentences, low, gentle, unhurried, with a rhythm that sounded like someone reading aloud to a child who'd already fallen asleep. He was talking to the mare. She stood in the dark hallway outside the locked door and listened. Couldn't make out the words. Didn't need to. The sound was enough a man who carried more tenderness than he could spend on people. So he poured it into a horse with a bad leg in a barn in the middle of a drought. Her hand drifted to the lock. The key sat where it always did, on the inside. She touched the metal. Didn't turn it, but she touched it. And that was new. Days 7 through 9. Josiah escalated. Left the north gate open, cattle scattered a quarter mile before Eli rounded them. Scattered tools from the shed across the yard in the dark. Once, he led the lame mare to the far pasture and tied her to a post where Eli would have to walk 40 minutes to retrieve her. Eli retrieved, repaired, continued, said nothing. Not once did his expression change. Not once did his hands shake or his voice rise. He simply absorbed each act of sabotage the way the dry ground absorbed the last of the water completely, without complaint, without leaving a trace. On day 8, Cora asked where he'd been before this. Places, he said. Picked up a hammer, changed the subject with his hands. She recognized the deflection. She used it herself every time someone at the general store asked how she was holding up. His shame wasn't about where he'd been. It was about what he believed the answer to a question he'd never been asked. What are you worth? Samuel called him the fix-it man at supper. Josiah set down his fork. Don't call him that. The fix-it man put flowers in my box. Samuel said, Those are weeds, baby. Cora said quietly. They're flowers if you want them to be. The table went silent. Cora looked at the 4th chair, still pressed against the wall. Except it wasn't. Not quite. Sometime in the past day, someone had moved it, 1 inch from the wall. Not to the table, just away, a finger's width of space between the chair back and the plaster. She didn't know who had done it. She didn't push it back. On the 10th day, the well quit. Cora lowered the bucket and heard it strike dry stone. She hauled it up, empty. Not even mud this time, just the hollow knock of wood on rock and a puff of dust that floated up from the shaft like a small, exhausted ghost giving up. She stood over the well mouth for a long time. Not crying, standing still in a way that was worse than crying, the stillness of a woman who had done the arithmetic and watched every column come up 0. 400 acres, no water, cattle dead in a week if nothing changed. Sell the herd, keep the land, sell the land, keep nothing, become nothing. The math was simple and the math was final. Josiah came to the well at noon, looked down into the dark throat of it, looked at Eli, standing 10 feet away with a shovel in his hands. You can't fix this. 4 words. The first he'd spoken to Eli in 10 days. They were accusation, plea, and test braided together so tightly you couldn't pull one strand free without unraveling the rest. Eli walked east, half a mile out, where the creek bed cut through the rock in a shallow channel shaded by cottonwoods. A thread of moisture still seeped between stones. He started digging. Not a well, a trench, a channel carved through clay and rock to redirect whatever the creek bed still held toward the house. Desperate work, probably pointless. The The kind of labor a man does when he's run out of ideas but hasn't run out of spine. "Stop wasting your strength," Cora called from the porch. "That creek's been dry since July." He kept digging. Samuel appeared with a tin cup and sat cross-legged beside the trench, began scooping dirt in small, earnest, useless motions, helping the way a 5-year-old helps with his whole heart and none of his weight. Mid-afternoon, Virgil Pratt rode up on a painted gelding worth more than everything Eli owned combined. Pratt ranched the property north and had been circling Cora's land the way a patient animal circles a wounded one. "Cora, I'll take that north pasture off your hands. 30 cents an acre." "It's worth 3 times that, Virgil, and you know it." Pratt shrugged, let his eyes drift to Eli, shirtless, sunburned, knee-deep in a ditch that probably led nowhere. "Hope your hired man's worth more than he looks." He tipped his hat and rode north, leaving the sentence to settle like dust on her skin. That night, near midnight, Eli was still in the trench. Cora walked out carrying a lantern. She set it at the edge of the ditch without a word. Then she sat down in the dirt beside him, her skirt spreading in the dust like a flower pressing itself flat. She didn't offer to help, didn't tell him to stop, just sat there. And for the first time in 12 days, the silence between them had nothing to do with children or cattle or a list on a kitchen wall. It was just theirs. 2 people sitting in the dirt at midnight, one of them digging, the other holding the light. Samuel's fever came on like a grass fire fast, airless, and everywhere at once. By the evening of day 11, the boy was burning. Cora's palm against his forehead pulled back the way a hand pulls back from a stove. 103 degrees. Climbing. The water ration was down to 2 gallons stored in the cellar, all that stood between them and nothing. She stripped Samuel to his undershirt, wrung cloths in the last clean water, and pressed them to his chest, his forehead, the soft hollows behind his knees where the veins ran close to the surface. "Mama." His voice was thin and dry as paper. "I'm cold." "I know, baby, I know." Eli saddled the mare without being asked. 2 hours to the creek bed in the dark, riding by starlight on a horse that limped worse with every mile. He strapped every container he could find to the saddle, 2 canteens, a milk jug, a tin washtub lashed down with rope. The mare protested once. He leaned down close to her ear and spoke in the voice Cora had heard through the barn wall, low, steady. The voice he saved for creatures he loved. The mare went. Josiah stood at the threshold of Samuel's room at midnight. He was wearing the work gloves. Cora looked at her older son. His father's gloves swallowed his hands, 3 sizes too large, the leather bunching at his wrists like empty sleeves. His face held that terrible adult expression no 11-year-old should know how to make, the one that says, "I am the man of this house, and I am not old enough, and I know both things, and I will do it anyway." "Come sit, Josiah." He sat on the floor beside the bed and held his brother's foot through the blanket. Didn't take the gloves off. Eli came back at 3 in the morning, water sloshing in every vessel, the mare favoring her legs so badly she nearly went down twice on the porch steps. He carried the washtub upstairs and didn't stop moving until Samuel was wrapped in fresh, cool cloths, the boy's breathing steadying under his hands. Then there was nothing left to do but wait. They sat on opposite sides of the bed, Cora in the chair, Eli on the floor, his back against the wall, his knees drawn up. Their hands rested on the same blanket, not touching, close enough that she could feel warmth rising from his skin like heat off a stone that is baked all day in the sun. "I had a boy once," Eli said. Cora didn't move. "I don't anymore." 6 words. He offered them the way a man offers the last thing in his pocket, without ceremony, without explanation, because there was nothing else left to give. She didn't ask what happened, didn't press. She moved her hand 1 inch closer on the blanket, still not touching. The space between their fingers held every question she would never ask and every answer he would never give, and it was enough. It was the most honest conversation either of them had had in years, and neither of them said another word. By dawn, the fever broke. Samuel's breathing deepened and his face cooled and his fingers uncurled from the blanket like small, pale flowers opening. Josiah had fallen asleep in the hallway, the work gloves still on, his cheek pressed against the floorboards. Eli looked at the kitchen wall. 23 items crossed off, 8 days of work done in 11, 3 days left on the deal she'd offered him. Cora followed his eyes. She knew what he was counting. Down the hall. The locked door was still shut, but the key was on the outside of the lock now. She'd moved it sometime during the night. She didn't remember deciding to. On the morning of day 12, Eli sat down across from Cora at the kitchen table. 4 chairs. The fourth was there now. Samuel had dragged it into place 2 days ago and no one had moved it back. It sat at the table like a word someone had said out loud that couldn't be unsaid. Eli looked at that chair for a long moment. Then he spoke. He said more in the next 90 seconds than he had in 12 days combined. "Ma'am, I ain't got money. I ain't got land. I got a horse that can barely walk and a hat that don't keep the rain out." He stopped. Not for effect, because the next part cost him something he hadn't budgeted for. "You need a loving father for your sons, and I need shelter. I can work. I don't drink. I won't raise my hand. Those boys need a man who shows up every day. I will show up. That's the deal. No love, no promises, no poetry. Just a man laying out the terms of his own worth like fence posts straight, functional, ordinary, driven into the ground one at a time." Cora's face didn't crumble. It went cold, not grief. Fury, the clean, bright, blade-sharp fury of a woman who has held everything together for 8 months with her bare hands and just been offered a transaction. "You think I'm a boarding house?" Her voice was low and steady, which was worse than shouting. Shouting meant she was still fighting. Steady meant she'd already decided. "You think my boys are a job posting? You think 8 months of holding this place together by myself means I'll settle for a deal?" "No, ma'am. I reckon you'll take the one that makes sense. Get out." He nodded. Once, he'd expected this, maybe counted on it. He collected his bedroll from the barn, his hat with the hole, saddled the lame mare one more time, cinching the girth strap with hands that were steady because they'd had practice being steady when nothing else was. He walked through the kitchen on his way out and passed the list on the wall, 23 of 31, in his handwriting now, mixed with a dead man's, and he didn't look at it. Josiah stood at the top of the stairs, arms at his sides, didn't move, didn't speak. Watched Eli walk through the door the way you watch weather coming knowing you can't stop it. Only measure it. Cora stood at the window. Eli rode down the road. The dust rose behind the mare's bad leg in slow, pale ribbons. The hat with the hole grew smaller against the white sky. Everything he'd arrived with, everything he was leaving with, minus $1.10 she'd paid him, plus 6 words he'd given away at 3 in the morning that he could never earn back. He was halfway to the property line when the sound reached him. Small feet, bare, fast, on dry ground. Samuel ran the way only a 5-year-old can without strategy, without doubt, with the absolute and unshakable conviction that running toward someone is the same as keeping them. He didn't call out, didn't yell come back, just ran. Bare feet slapping the hot-packed road, arms pumping, raising a ribbon of dust behind him that was almost as tall as he was. He ran the way water runs downhill because there was no other direction that made sense. Eli heard it. The mare's hoofbeats were slow enough, lame enough that the boy's footsteps cut through the silence like a blade through cloth. Small, uneven, desperate, impossibly fast for legs that short. He stopped the mare. He sat with his back to the boy. His hands tightened on the reins, then loosened, then tightened again. His shoulders held high and rigid for 12 days, for months before that, for years before that. Braced against every wind that had ever blown through his life, did something they hadn't done in longer than he could remember. They dropped. Samuel reached the mare and grabbed Eli's boot in the stirrup with both hands. Small fingers wrapped around cracked leather and held on with the ferocious, unreasoning grip of a child who didn't know yet that people leave and stay gone. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just held on. On the porch, Josiah stood, the work gloves on his hands. He looked at his mother. Cora looked back. The longest silence of the whole story passed between them, not empty, but pressurized, dense, the way air gets before lightning splits it open. Josiah sat down on the porch step, the one Eli had fixed on day 3. He pulled the gloves off. Slowly, one finger at a time, he set them on the wood beside him, palms up, empty. The gesture of a boy putting down something he'd been carrying too long. Room made. Cora didn't call Samuel back, didn't wave Eli forward, didn't speak. She walked inside, and when she came back she was carrying the fourth chair. She set it on the porch, facing the road, and she sat in it. A chair placed where a man could see it. Not a word, not a wave, just a piece of furniture that said everything language couldn't. The last image is the kitchen at dusk. 4 chairs around the table, 3 plates, because Cora hasn't set the fourth one yet. But the chair is there. The work gloves hang by the back door on their usual nail. Calfskin shaped to a dead man's fingers. Loyal as a dog that doesn't know its owner is gone. Next to them, on a new nail, the hat with the hole in it brim touching the glove's cuff like they've been neighbors for years. Outside, through the back door left open to catch whatever mercy the evening might carry. The trench Eli dug catches the last copper light. And at the bottom, barely visible, hardly more than a rumor, a thin ribbon of water moves between the rocks. Not a river, not a well coming back to life, just enough to catch light, just enough to prove that something, somewhere underneath the cracked and stubborn earth, is still trying. The room at the end of the hall stands open. No one has gone inside yet, but the door is open, and somewhere in the house, Samuel is laughing, is